Mario Kart World is getting super close to release, only being a couple weeks away. Wait a minute, this isn't a Mario Kart video, what am I talking about? Well, one of the most interesting aspects about this brand new Mario Kart game would definitely have to be its roster. So many wacky new characters are being added like Pokies, the Snowman, and even a cow. But on top of what characters that are there, a lot of people have been talking about what characters aren't there. Quite a few heavy hitters from across the Mario Kart series don't seem to be present at all, and that includes all 7 of the Koopalings: Larry, Lemmy, Iggy, Morton, Roy, Wendy, and Ludwig. Now it is still possible that they could be unlockables, which is definitely what I hope is the case because Larry is my dad's favorite character. However, I could see a world where they are entirely cut because a lot of people on the internet don't seem to be big Koopaling fans. But I'm different. I've always quite liked the Koopalings, and that of course extends to the mainline Mario series as well. Obviously it's cool to get unique bosses, but I don't mind the Koopalings showing up every now and then if they get good fights. So far the Koopalings have appeared in 5 separate mainline Mario games as bosses: Super Mario Bros. 3, Super Mario World, New Super Mario Bros. Wii, New Super Mario Bros. 2, and New Super Mario Bros. U. No, they were not in DS, stop asking. Since each Koopaling got 2 fights in Wii, that means we have a total of 42 fights across the series. But with so many fights, some are bound to be worse than others, so today, to remember our possibly fallen Koopaling comrades, I'm going to be ranking every Koopaling fight from the worst to the best. Now how exactly am I going to be ranking these? To do well on the list, the fight has to be both creative and fun. I also prefer my boss fights to be challenging, so that'll be an important factor here. That's especially important in the case of the Koopalings because they infamously have pretty easy cheese strats across the series. In most fights you can attack them extremely quickly before they even get a chance to fight back, so any fight that does something to make this cheese harder to do will perform much higher on the list. Now in addition to the standard boss fight ranking, I also thought it would be fun to take the average of each Koopaling at the end of the video to determine which is the best and which is the worst Koopaling across the series. So if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and let's jump right— wait, no, I'm not counting Bowser Jr., shut up. And let's jump right in. Kicking off our list, we have 42 Wendy 2 Wii and 41 Wendy New Super Mario Bros. 2. Before we get into the fights, I decided to include a power-up from each game next to the ranking to make it clear what game the fight is from. This is lifted from my 2D level ranking, and also don't worry if you've already seen that video, the order of fights here won't be the same as that video since that talked about levels as a whole. Not that I expect you all to have that ranking memorized.
You have 3 seconds to tell me what level was at 566 or you die.
Alright, anyway, what makes these 2 fights my least favorite Koopaling battles? Both have a very similar gimmick where the room will occasionally be filled with water, and while that is a unique gimmick, it's also an annoying one. I already don't like water controls, but I could give this a pass if it worked like Mario Maker. In that series, you're still able to jump on enemies while swimming, depending on what they are, of course. That is not the case here, as trying to jump on Wendy will lead to you taking damage. That isn't explained well at all. There's no real visual indicator that she's invincible while the water is up. I really don't like that, as it makes this fight turn into a slow and unclear waiting game. Had the water physics worked like the Mario Maker series, these would certainly be much higher. As for the differences between the fights, Wii 2 has Wendy shoot out her classic rings that bounce around the room like a DVD screensaver. While I do like the projectile, she does use it in other fights, so I like the NSMB2 version better here. She commands Cheep Cheeps to do her bidding, which I found to be a bit more interesting. 40 Lemmy SMB3. This is what I believe to be one of the most fundamentally flawed Koopaling fights. In every fight Lemmy is a part of, he creates bouncy balls which obviously bounce Mario around if he touches them. This is a very unique projectile as it doesn't damage Mario by itself, rather it's trying to bounce him off into a cliff. Now with that being said, I want you to take a look back at his SMB3 fight. Where's the cliff? Yeah, they kind of forgot the one thing that makes Lemmy's fight a possible challenge. That's especially bad in Mario 3's case, as he's the 6th Koopaling you face in that game, so you would expect him to be the 2nd hardest. But without any ledges to fall off, he really isn't a challenge whatsoever. 39 Lemmy U. This is in a very similar boat to Mario 3's version. Once again, there's no cliffs to fall off here, but they did at least give him something to make him a little challenging. See, these aren't just bouncy balls, as they were made in a factory. A bomb factory. They're bombs. Yeah, so now they'll be able to explode after a bit, which can actually damage Mario. Honestly though, I feel like it's still way too easy to avoid the explosion, and it also makes the fight feel a lot less unique. But at the very least in Mario U, Lemmy is the first Koopaling, so him being the easiest does make sense. 38 Morton NSMB2. I think the idea behind this fight is neat, but they just make a lot of mistakes that end up making it way too easy. Instead of moving around the arena, Morton will stay stationary at the top center. From there, he'll use his magic to summon in spike balls that roll down toward the player. Definitely unique from any other fight in the series, however, due to him being stationary, it is really easy to hit him without any risk. That's especially bad when you take Koopaling cheese into account. Like I mentioned in the intro, between hits, you could just wait out the Koopalings sliding in their shells and then immediately jump on their heads again before they can attack. Do this for all 3 hits and it makes the boss fight extremely easy. At the very least for most of the other fights, there is a tiny bit of unpredictability of when they'll get out, which can catch you off guard. Here though, Morton will always slide off screen and then come out of a pipe at the top center. So all you have to do is wait for him to pass you once in his shell, camp the top, and jump on him as soon soon as he comes back. That makes this by far the easiest Koopaling fight to cheese in the entire series, so even if the idea is neat, I can't in good faith place it any higher than this. 37. Roy NSMB2. Alright, now we're starting to break out of the problematic fights and entering into the super basic ones. This is the first Koopaling fight in NSMB2, so keeping it on the easy end makes sense. In this fight, Roy will just try to shoulder bash a player and rarely cast some projectiles. It's really not hard to avoid any of these attacks though, so jumping on his head 3 times is pretty straightforward. Oh, and the walls are able to close around you here, but honestly that kinda makes it easier to cheese him as you'll just be closer to wherever he decides to pop up. 36. Roy World, and 35.
Morton Koopa Jr.
World. Here we have our first pair of fights from Mario World. For the most part, the Koopalings in this game share their fight mechanics with another, so almost every entry from this game is going to be covered in pairs. Both Roy and Morton will be able to climb up the walls of their arena and then drop down onto Mario. If Mario is standing on the ground when they land, he'll be stunned for a moment, which gives him a chance to strike. In all honesty, it's an extremely basic set of fights, and I feel like they should have done a bit more here. The lack of any projectiles really brings it down. The only difference between the two is that the walls in Roy's fight will gradually close in. Normally that would make me place Roy's higher, but I kind of felt bad for Morton and he did it first, so I'll give him a pass for now. 34. Larry 1 Wii. I would say of all the Koopaling fights in the series, this is the most generic of the bunch. That does make sense as Larry is usually used as the baseline Koopaling, so here he just kind of jumps around and shoots at you. I did find this to be a bit more difficult than Roy's NSMB2 fight though, because Larry jumping around is harder to catch than the grounded shoulder bash. 33. Roy 1 Wii. This is like a slightly more difficult version of Larry's first Wii fight. Instead of just jumping and shooting, whenever Roy lands, he'll shake the stage. That makes it so anyone who is grounded when he did gets stunned, which could lead to them getting hit by his projectile. That is a slight bit of a double-edged sword though, as if you manage to avoid the stun, he stands still for a prolonged period of time, making it pretty easy to hit him 3 times. 32. Morton SMB3, 31. Larry SMB3, and 30. Iggy SMB3.
Why are you blue?
These 3 all use very similar mechanics to one another where they'll jump around and shoot projectiles at Mario. I believe their AI does change a bit between fights, but it's not enough to separate them much on the list. The real changes come from the arena layouts, and due to them not being a flat plane, they are a bit more interesting than Larry's first Wii fights, but only by a little bit. It also helps that each of them jump while in their shell phase, which makes the 3 fights harder. I believe Iggy tries to jump around a bit more than the other 2, which is what puts him as the best of this trilogy. 29. Morton 2 Wii. This is another Morton fight where I like the idea, but the execution was a bit flawed. Kamek uses his magic before the fight here to make the ground a bit wonky, and you'll notice quickly that whenever Morton ground pounds, he'll shoot up the floor at his sides toward the ceiling. If Mario is on one of these platforms and they shoot upward, he'll be crushed. While I do think that is a pretty neat idea, after Morton ground pounds, he stands still for an incredibly long time, making it absurdly easy to hit him. I think it would have been nice if maybe he could cast a spell after ground pounding to make it at least a little bit harder. On top of that, when he ground pounds, the floor really doesn't shoot up that quickly, so even if you're on top of it, it's not that hard to get off before dying. This definitely isn't the worst fumbled idea in this video, but I still think it could have been improved a bit. 28. Larry 2 Wii. This doesn't have the most complicated gimmick in the world, but as a final boss for World 1, I think it works quite well. Kamek will make the ground here move up and down, which can make it more difficult to jump on Larry's head and avoid his attacks. It can also make it a slight bit harder to predict where he'll leave his shell upon being hit, which could prevent a little bit of cheese. Again, not the craziest gimmick in the world, but it's enough to make for some interesting scenarios with Larry gaining the high ground. 27. Larry NSMB2. Honestly, this is very similar to the last one, but instead of the whole floor shifting, it's just part of the floor and part of the ceiling. I think the same strengths apply here as well, and I like how the ceiling can sometimes block your jumps. Honestly, I was wanting to put Larry's Wii fight on top at first, but in the NSMB2 version, his projectiles can actually bounce off surfaces, which I think makes this fight a bit more interesting. 26. Iggy 1 Wii. This is probably the Koopaling fight I have done the most due to it being part of the Wii any percent speedrun, which I used to do a lot when I was younger. That means I do have a bit of nostalgia here, but I still think this is a fair spot. Like Larry, he'll be able to jump around and shoot projectiles, but at a little bit of a faster rate. The main difference here is that the room is filled with moving platforms, which I think helps make this boss a bit more challenging. It can be trickier to aim your jumps here, and the platforms can also act as a defense for Iggy after his shell phase if he wakes up underneath one. It's still not a super difficult fight, but the platforms do definitely help. 25. Wendy U. This fight takes a bit of a unique approach to her ring attacks, that I honestly think is kinda worse. Normally the rings will bounce around the room acting as a constant threat, but here they'll bounce until they hit an icicle on the roof, which will then cause the icicle to fall. Thing is, the icicles wait quite a bit before actually dropping, so it's pretty easy to get out of the way before they do. While I do prefer the normal ring gimmick though, this definitely isn't bad. The floor being icy can also help make the icicles more deadly and also make cheesing Wendy more difficult due to the slippery physics. 24. 24, Morton 1 Wii. Funnily enough, I actually think Morton's first fight in Wii is a little bit better than his second. That mostly comes down to his unique arena here, as it's a lot smaller than normal. There are 2 elevated platforms at each of the edges and a small indent in the middle where Morton will stay. While you may think the elevated section would keep you safe, there are actually skewers on top which will alternate slamming down onto Mario. Add on Morton's projectiles and ground pound stun and there's actually quite a bit to avoid in this fight. The issue is that due to Morton having a smaller arena for himself, it can be easier to cheese him since there is less places for him to pop up, but overall I think this fight is solid. 23, Roy 2 Wii. As soon as this fight starts, Roy ascends into the ceiling. That's because it's all been replaced by pipe, so his goal is to travel between them and drop down onto the player's head. Even if he misses though, due to him being, well, he's sort of,
fat.
He'll cause the player to be stunned if they were on the ground after he landed. He does drop somewhat quickly from the pipe, so it's certainly possible to catch someone off guard. It is held back a bit by it being fairly simple to cheese, but I think overall this fight is solid. 22, Ludwig World. And here we have finally reached our last Koopaling to not appear yet, Ludwig von Koopa. Can you guess which one's my favorite? Well, to be fair, Ludwig is usually the final Koopaling in each of the games, so they generally make sure his fights are really strong ones to end on. The only exception in the mainline series is Mario World, and even then, he's the only Koopaling to have an entirely unique fight to himself in that game. He'll be able to shoot fireballs at you, which can be somewhat tricky to avoid due to how many he shoots in a row. Once you manage to hit him though, he'll go into a shell sliding state, but if you think you can cheese him, you're sorely mistaken because he'll just straight up be invincible upon getting out of his shell. I also just think the way he rotates back into position is really funny. Now the fight is certainly neat, but not really that special. It's also hurt by the fact that Ludwig for some reason doesn't hit you while he's jumping, even if he lands on your head. So you can just sort of jump up underneath him and hit him like that. Luckily his boss fight arena is so long that you may not reach him in time to do that, but it is still a flaw that's worth noting. 21, Ludwig 1 Wii. Starting off the fight, Ludwig does an evil laugh to himself. You can definitely tell he's the final Koopaling just based on his mechanics. Not only do his projectiles home in on the player, but he also has a flutter jump which makes his landings far less predictable. There's no crazy gimmick with this fight yet, but even just his movements alone make him a very solid challenge. 20, Larry U. This is sort of similar to Iggy's first Wii fight, but I kinda like the idea better here. Instead of moving platforms, water streams come up from the ground instead. Not only does that fit with him being the boss of the water world, but it also can make him a lot harder to avoid. The water streams will automatically push him upward, so if he's in a shell sliding state, it can sort of act like a jumping attack. The water can also block the player from easily cheesing him, just like the platforms in Iggy's fight. So overall, I think Larry's is a lot better from both a mechanic and aesthetic perspective. 19, Wendy 1 Wii, and 18, Wendy SMB3. Both of these are back to back because they share the same gimmick of showcasing her unique ring attack. I've always liked the idea behind this attack, even if I'm not a Wendy fan. I like how it makes the fight get harder as it goes as she spawns in more rings. The problem here is of course Koopaling cheese once again, because this fight does nothing to prevent it, and that leads to the fight losing a lot of uniqueness. I also think the rings on the Wii version probably could have been made a bit faster since they can often just stay near the ceiling out of Mario's way. That's the main reason Mario 3's fight is better, along with the room itself being smaller. I think it'd be cool if Wendy was also given the gimmick of walls closing in for a future fight, just like Roy did in Mario World. It would work great with the rings, but as of now, I think these fights are still decent. 17, Iggy World, and 16, Larry World. Here we have another Mario World pair with one of the most interesting fights of the bunch. Unlike every other Koopaling battle, the goal here is not to jump on their head 3 times, but rather push them off the edge into the lava. I really like the unique idea here, as it makes these fights much more distinct. The problem is that they can be really easy to kill sometimes. I mean, once you jump on their head once, you pretty much just have to follow them down the slope and into the lava, making these potentially the quickest Koopaling fights in the franchise. I do at least appreciate that both shoot out fireballs and the fact that the platform tilts, but I still think more could have been done to make it harder, especially since Larry's fight is actually the final Koopaling fight in Mario World. At the very least, he did get lava bubbles jumping up during the battle, which can catch the player off guard. 15, Lemmy 1 Wii. It's been a little bit since we've seen this guy, and that's because when they actually try with his fights, they're really cool. To go with this boss fight being in the snow world, the floor here is made entirely out of ice, obviously making it more slippery. That goes extremely well with this bouncy ball gimmick, as it makes it harder to control and stay away from the cliff. Oh yeah, there's actually a cliff this time. So I think this is a much better realized version of a Lemmy fight than the ones we saw earlier in the list. 14, Roy SMB3, and 13, Ludwig SMB3. Both of these guys basically have the same mechanic of shooting projectiles and stunning the player whenever they land on the ground. What makes them place much higher than say Roy's first fight in Wii is the fact that the ground pounds here are much less telegraphed. It's pretty much every time they land that the ground shakes, meaning you have to constantly jump to avoid the stun, which I think makes the fights much more interesting. Of the two, I think Ludwig shoots out more projectiles, which gave him an edge over Roy, but quality and difficulty wise, their fights are extremely close. 12, Roy Yu. I like this fight because they just straight up gave him a bazooka. He'll use it to shoot bullet bills at you, all while jumping between moving platforms. I think this is a really good concept for a fight and fits well with the mountain world. However, this one is definitely hit hard by Koopaling Cheese. For some reason, the platforms disappear whenever you hit him, but I think if they stuck around, that could help prevent Cheese a little bit. Maybe they could even have a platform carry him off screen between hits to give him a chance to shoot again. There's just a ton of missed potential with this fight, so while I do love the concept, I can't really bring it up too much higher. 11, Wendy World, and 10, Lemmy World. For both of these, you have to find which of these dummies is an imposter. Depending on the fight, Wendy or Lemmy will stick up out of a random pipe along with 2 dummies, so you have to use your eyes to stomp on the correct one. That's all while a lava bubble bounces around the room, so you have to watch your step. I think this is a pretty creative fight, and it's also great that you can't really cheese it since they don't have a shell phase. As for which I think is better, I personally prefer Lemmy due to him having more varied terrain. Yes, Wendy does get an extra lava bubble, but honestly the bump in Lemmy's can make it a bit harder to avoid. It is interesting that neither Wendy or Lemmy use their unique ring or bouncy ball projectiles here, but I still really like the fight. 9, Ludwig Yu. First off, I find it funny how Ludwig says, "Oh." Has nothing to do with the ranking, I just thought I'd mention that. As for the fight itself, Ludwig will jump up into the air and clone himself. Which one's the real Ludwig? Luckily there is a tell. Each of them will shoot down projectiles toward Mario, but the real Ludwig will shoot 3 at a time instead of 2, which I think works very well for the fight. I do wish maybe there was a punishment for jumping on the wrong one beside them poofing, but honestly I think this works well as is. 8, Morton Yu. I think this is a fantastic fight for Mario U's Desert World. In this battle, Morton gets to take revenge on Pokey for replacing him in the Mario Kart World roster. Mario just happens to be around for that, which means possibly getting hit by one of Pokey's flying body parts. What I love about this is just the fact that Pokey creates a wall between Morton and Mario, so you have to wait it out at least a little bit before getting a chance to strike yourself. I also like that Morton has multiple different types of attacks here. He can shoot the parts across the ground, through the air, or even send out 2 at once. That variety makes this fight much more interesting as you have to react to which type he's doing. Overall, the only real criticism I can give is just the fact that again, Koopaling Cheese exists. I wish he would just bring up the Pokey first before coming out of his shell, as that would make the cheese far harder to do. As it is now though, it's definitely still deserving to place quite high up. 7, Iggy Yu. This one perfectly fits Iggy's personality of being a weirdo. Using the pipes at the side of the arena, he'll be able to start walking on the ceiling where he'll then shoot down projectiles toward you. Not all of these are normal projectiles though, as the red one will be able to spawn in a blarg wherever it lands. That was a really nice addition to just make this fight a little bit harder. Between his attacks, Iggy will fall back down to the floor, which will give you a chance to hit him. Now Iggy does suffer from Koopaling Cheese a bit here, but while in his shell phase, he can move through the pipes and suddenly turn around, which makes him a lot less predictable than most of the other Koopalings. I still wish he would just get out of his shell while on the ceiling to prevent Cheese period, but this is definitely one of the better fights in that regard. 6, Lemmy NSMB2. This provides another unique spin on his bouncy ball gimmick as the floor here is now a conveyor belt. That makes it even more difficult to stay on solid ground as it's actively pushing you toward the cliff. Lemmy will always stay at the end of the conveyor that it's pointed away from, meaning you always have to fight the direction of the conveyor to get to him. That is, unless he bounce off one of his balls to hit the switch on the ceiling, which will flip the direction of the conveyor and force Lemmy to move. That adds another smaller layer to the fight that I think is really cool even if it wasn't needed. The conveyor can also make Koopaling Cheese a bit harder here, though it is definitely still possible. 5, Lemmy 2 Wii. I was really stuck between which of these 2 Lemmy battles were better, but I think this one just barely gets the edge for me. Like his first fight, this is also on an ice platform, but this time the ball he's on top of is a lot larger. In fact, his ball is so massive that Mario can't simply jump on his head without some sort of help. You can just use a propeller suit of course, but I also like how you can use the bouncy balls against him here to try and parkour onto his head. I think that's a lot of fun, and it's especially helped by the other factors like the icy floor and Lemmy himself being able to jump around the arena too. He'll also make his ball bigger as the fight goes on, making it more and more challenging to hit him. I think this is the best realized Lemmy fight in the series, and again, the only real criticism is the possibility of cheese. Otherwise, I love how this used his bouncy ball mechanics. 4, Ludwig NSMB2. His fight here has one of the most unique methods of attacks across the series. Across the roof of the arena, there are several hanging chains, and he'll randomly choose one to hang down from to shoot at you. While he's up there, you have to use one of the cannons on the floor to shoot him down instead. I think that is a really creative idea for a fight, though I do still have a few criticisms. I think it is a bit too easy on the first 2 hits, as going into a cannon basically makes you invincible to his attacks. So while the idea is definitely good, I think making it more dangerous would have been nice. I do really like how on the 3rd hit though, he'll start swinging, so you actually have to time when you shoot out. I wish there was a bit more punishment for missing, but I do at least think the challenge is creative enough. 3, Iggy 2 Wii, and 2, Iggy NSMB2. These 2 have always been some of my favorites across the series because of the fact that Iggy's got a dog. This is one of the most creative ideas for a fight. Iggy will ride behind his chain chomp and shoot projectiles out at the player, which can make him really hard to catch. What I also love is the fact that when Iggy is hit, instead of going into a shell, you still have to deal with the chain chomp. He'll start biting around more aggressively, which makes it so there's really no cheese to be had in this fight. Of the two, I do think I slightly prefer the NSMB2 version. On Wii, the arena is a pretty simple rectangle, which still works really well, but it's not nearly as complex as the NSMB2 version. Here the chain chomp has multiple paths to go down, making it a lot less predictable. Plus between hits, the chain chomp can actually go off screen here to let Iggy revive, and if they come in from the top, it can be really hard to hit Iggy immediately. So while the two fights are obviously really close, I think I'll give NSMB2 a slight lead. But as for my favorite Koopaling fight, it's definitely gotta be 1, Ludwig 2 Wii. This has always been one of the coolest fights aesthetically and thematically in the series. After Kamek flies by, the ground underneath us completely shatters to reveal 3 moving platforms rapidly rising up a tower. Mario has to defeat Ludwig all while the ground is rising upward, and that is just such a cool idea. The platforms are also not synced with each other perfectly, so sometimes they will rise up or lower down unpredictably, making it much harder to aim your attacks. This is made even more difficult with how deadly Ludwig's attacks are. He's able to spew out a ton of projectiles at once, creating a wall that can be pretty difficult to break through. He's also still got his flutter jump ability, which will allow him to rise off screen and land on platforms of his choosing. The great part about this is even if you can see where he's going to land, due to the varying heights of the platforms, it can sometimes be hard to hit him upon landing. That also helps with preventing cheese as well. Even if he can only shell slide on a single platform, reaching him the second he jumps up can be hard to do. So overall, I think this fight did just about everything right. The idea of battling up an endless tower across 3 rickety platforms is just so cool, and I don't think anyone can disagree with that. So for being one of the most challenging and thematically sound battles, I think Ludwig's second Wii fight is easily my favorite Koopaling battle across the franchise. Wait, the video's not done yet! Remember, we still have to look at the averages for each of the Koopalings to see which ones did the best across the series. The lower number they got, the better, as that means they got a higher ranking on average. So starting with allegedly the worst Koopaling, we have 7, Morton, with an average of 27.67. This was a little surprising, but looking through his list of fights, it does make sense. A lot of them had great ideas, but were just held back by execution most of the time. At least his fight in U did make it to the top 10. Next up, we actually have a tie for 6th and 5th, being Wendy and Larry, with an average of 26. Wendy was definitely hurt by having 2 at the very bottom, but I'm not gonna complain because I don't really like her anyway. Larry being low also makes sense, but I don't think anyone can blame him since he's usually the tutorial Koopaling. Of all of them, he had the lowest top placement at 16th, but I think Larry still did a solid job for what he is. In my mind, I give him the edge over Wendy in the tiebreaker. Just barely passing those 2 for 4th, we have Roy with an average of 25.83. This is about what I expected for him, though I thought the gap would be a lot larger. For 3rd, we have Lemmy with an average of 19.17. His story is really sad as he gets super held back by his SMB3 and U fights not having gaps at the edges. Despite having 2 really low placing fights though, the rest were all bangers, which earned him a very high placement on the average list. Coming up in 2nd, we have Iggy with an average of 14.17. Due to him being the weird Koopaling, I feel like he generally got some of the more creative fights, especially with the chain chomp fights and his U battle. Also, I'm happy to finally beat the Iggy hate allegations after saying his costume sucks in Smash Ultimate. But I'm sure to no one's surprise, coming in first we have Ludwig with an average of 11.67. Due to his status of being the oldest and usually final Koopaling, he's generally given some of the best fights. I know I of course have bias because he's my favorite, but part of the reason he is my favorite is because his fights are so good. So in the end, I think Ludwig is more than deserving of placing as the absolute best Koopaling in the Mario franchise. But anyways, that's it for this video. Are you mad I didn't include the Luigi U fights despite them being the exact same as the normal Mario U fights? Let me know in the comments. I had a lot of fun doing this video, and I think it was cool to reflect on some of these bosses across the series. I hope one day the Koopalings can show up in a 3D game because I think it would be cool to see what they do in that setting. And yes, if anyone is wondering, I do still plan on doing a full 2D boss ranking in the future. I just thought a smaller Koopaling-centric video would be fun too. But before I go, I've got to thank my members being Cassie Channel, Fredbear's Diner, Nathaniel B, Seth the Sunsun Villano, Luma, Blessed Tiger, Maids02, Yanni the Duck, Wyatt Derpy, Trader Mo, Mevins 2001, Nuclear, Kid Trunks 15, Caddy Shroom, Enchanted Skull, SMA, B Major 2003, Arson the Raboot, Sir Musty, Balandor, Puggles Are Fun, Diluted Colors, Cinder CC, Jade Avery, Pronto Clone, Thicky Reiki, Ungenio TM, CW McCain, Tibby, JubeTube Tesseract, Mr. McMahon 5702, Hippopotamus, Jameson Pageson, Wilbert, GoldenSand/15, Zfrost, Stuffy Ant, Justex, Conconut to Keep, and Christian Flattery Sequel Edition. But anyways, dry bones for Smash, and I'll see you guys next time.